Hello, I'm Gamer Vince, and you want to play a wizard in Pathfinder. Probably the most powerful class in all of 3.5 and Pathfinder. The wizard is considered to be the most powerful class because they are the most versatile. Being able to cast spells is incredibly useful. So I'm going to be going over how to build a very powerful and somewhat optimized wizard. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I can get over all the information you need to build the absolutely most powerful wizard there ever was. There are written guides that are much better at explaining this than I can be in this sort of visual medium. But that said, I think I can get you guys started on the right track and at least help you identify what makes a wizard good. So let's jump right in. So let's first talk about what the first thing you need to decide when building a wizard is what kind of wizard are you going to be. Now obviously wizards cast lots of spells, that's their thing, but you really need to ask yourself is what kind of spells do you want to specialize in? Which is really what the class itself, when building a wizard, asks you to begin with, is that you have to pick an arcane school, and these aren't going to mean a whole lot to you just yet. There's the Abjuration School, Conjuration, Divination, Enchantment, Evocation, Illusion, Necromancy. Don't actually know what Sin Magic Specialist is. That's new. That was added new. There's Transmutation and a Universalist. I'm going to ignore this for now. But these are the types of specialists you can be because that's the type of schools of magic there are. And depending on what kind of wizard you want to be, you want slightly different things out of your wizard build. What a lot of, I think, new players to D&D and Pathfinder want to do is build what's called a blaster caster. That is a wizard that's flinging fireballs and scorching rays and those kinds of abilities, basically to deal as much damage as they can. That, however, is a little bit of a trap. While wizards can fill that niche of blaster caster, they can deal plenty of damage with what are called evocation spells. That's your damage spell group. You can do that, but you won't be as good at it as, say, a sorcerer. Sorcerers tend to be a little bit better of a blaster caster, especially in Pathfinder, where they've got some abilities to let them beef up their damage spells. But also, that said, is that is not the most effective way to play a wizard. A wizard is much better at disabling foes and what's called battlefield control. Utility spells that can be used in multiple ways, and that's really where the wizard excels at. The damage spells are tempting, but if you really want to shine as a wizard, there are some other spells you'll want. So when you're thinking about what kind of wizard you want to play, is that it's perfectly fine to play a blaster caster wizard. That will totally work, but I recommend the battlefield control wizard who disables foes with a single spell, because there's a lot of really good ways to do that. And you'll also be buffing the party and debuffing enemies quite a bit. Buffing and debuffing, of course, mean buffing being beneficial enchantments, that kind of thing, that's helping your party, like, oh, +1 to their attacks or something like that. Well, debuffs are, of course, the penalties that your opponents will take. So you're going to be buffing, debuffing, battlefield control, and maybe just a touch of explosions to go with it just in case. So that's the kind of wizard I recommend you play. But like I said, that doesn't mean it has to be that you have to play that kind of wizard. You can specialize also in things like divination, where you're looking into the future, and that could be a really fun thing to play. And roleplay wise, that could be really neat. Okay, but let's talk optimization here. So to start with, let's talk about ability scores, because ability scores is sort of where you're going to be starting your character, and wizards are very simple in ability scores because you need a high intelligence. That's all you need. Get your intelligence as high as possible. That is all that is sort of absolutely required. Your intelligence is your bread and butter. And one of the reasons why is that, well, see, here's this whole section on abilities and spellcasters. You get more spells for having a higher intelligence. Don't forget that. A lot of people that I play with sort of forget that having a high. So you have this chart right here which tells you how many spells you get. Like a first level wizard is going to get 3 0-level spells called cantrips for the wizard, and a single first level spell. And you might think to yourself, like, a single first level spell, that's kind of cruddy. Well, if you have an intelligence above 12, which you really, really need to be a wizard, you're going to get a bonus spell. You're going to get bonus spells for having a high intelligence, and you're going to get an additional first level spell. If your intelligence is 20, if you can get it that high, which I recommend if you can, then you're going to get 2 additional first level spells. So you're going to get some additional spells just for having a high intelligence. That said, what about so you basically want your intelligence to be absolutely as high as you can get it. There's pretty much no exception to that if you want to play a good wizard, because wizards are all about spells, and having a high intelligence is going to increase your ability to cast spells. That's just it. That's period. That's what you got to do. Now, what about the other stats? Strength and charisma can pretty safely be dumped. Strength and charisma don't help you in pretty much any way, except maybe with skills. So you can, if you don't care about diplomacy, and I'm not even sure how many strength skills there aren't very many strength skills, so strength just dump, and charisma, unless you want to do like a role play charismatic wizard or something along those lines, you can dump both of those pretty safely, which means that you can get your strength and charisma down to a 7 if you really wanted to. That's perfectly fine, and then snag those extra points to buff yourself in other ways. Then there is your constitution and dexterity, and do not dump those. They are not a priority, but do not dump them. Constitution, of course, gives you hit points, and as a wizard you'll be lacking those, so getting to maybe a 12 constitution would be good. And dexterity actually helps you out a lot, because not only is it going to raise your AC, which you're going to need, there's also a lot of spells that are what's called ranged touch, where you have to make a dexterity attack roll versus an opponent to try to hit them, and having a high dexterity helps you out there. So I wouldn't dump those either. So if you can get dexterity and constitution at least to a 12, and maybe preferably to a 14, that's great too. That is highly recommended. Then there's wisdom. Wisdom, the only reason why you need wisdom at all is for your will save, really. There's a couple of skills that key off wisdom, like perception, and having a high perception is really good. But wisdom is not the most important for you, because as a wizard, you have a very high will save to begin with. Will save is the only good save you have, so having a high wisdom is not crucial for you, because your will save is going to be high kind of regardless. That said, though, maybe keep it around a 10. Don't take a penalty. There's no real reason to need to take a penalty. If you are really, really starving for point, but like if you're playing a low fantasy setting where you've only got 10 points to make do with, you could dump your wisdom as well, just to get lots and lots of points to use in your other ability scores. But aside from that, there's not really a reason to. So 10 wisdom. So in summary, 7 charisma and strength, 10 wisdom, 12 or 14 dexterity and constitution if you can muster it, and try to strive for that 18 intelligence. A 17 or 16 intelligence would probably do you just fine, but certainly not lower than 16. Do not go lower than 16 if it can be helped at all. So that's ability scores. But let's talk, just for a quick moment, let's talk about skills. I know that when I went over my fighter guide, I didn't talk about skills a whole lot. That's because fighters don't really have any skills that they care about. There's just almost nothing that a fighter needs skill-wise. However, the wizard has a couple of spells that, skills that they can utilize. So the first thing you might think to yourself is like, well, the wizard only gets 2 skill ranks per level plus intelligence modifier. That's not very much. That's as much as the fighter. Yeah, but your intelligence modifier should be through the roof. You should have, hopefully, a +4, if not a +5 intelligence modifier. So that's going to be giving you 6 or 7 skill points per level. And that's actually quite high. That's on par with, I believe, a bard who gets +6 plus intelligence intelligence modifier, I believe. So you're getting actually a lot of skill points for the game because your intelligence is just going to be so high. Which one of these should you get though? So appraise is not terribly useful in my experience. If you're in a game, this is a very situational skill. You're basically appraising the value of things, and if you're in a game that's likely to be useful, where you have to appraise lots of things, and your dungeon master really likes to do a lot of bartering, where you're bartering over the value of objects, appraise might come in handy, but otherwise I'd skip it. Craft, you have to pick a specific skill. So when you click on craft, you will notice that it should give you a couple of options. You could do craft skills and DCs. Yeah, there's craft alchemy, there's craft bows and armor and weapons, and there's a couple of other things as well. In general, craft is not a skill that you're going to be using a whole lot, because crafting armors, bows, weapons, and all these things, it sounds good, but to be perfectly honest, you're just going to be buying them anyway, and you're going to be using your skill points for other things. So craft is not one that I recommend, but you can get. Check out the craft skill if you want to pick something there. Fly does not give you the ability to fly. In fact, you can only put points into fly if you have a way of flying, which means at level 1, at level 2, at level 3, even at level 4, you're not usually going to have a way to fly. So yeah, fly you can't even put any points into. Once you do have access to it, once you have a method of flying, fly basically helps you fly better. It's essentially like a pilot check. It's the way I like to think about it. That if you're in turbulent weather, or you're trying not to crash, or somebody's grabbed hold of you while you're flying, those kinds of things, this check is going to help you out. It's not terribly useful. It doesn't come up that often. I feel like wizards have enough wizardy spells to get themselves out of trouble, but fly is there, and you may want to put a couple of points into it if you're flying a lot. Now comes the skill that is probably the most important, which is knowledge. Knowledge. As a wizard, you can get any knowledge. Knowledge is like craft, and is that the skill points are put into specific knowledge fields, like Arcana or Dungeoneering, Engineering, all of these ones. So there's a lot of them. And as the wizard, knowledge is also based off of intelligence, so your knowledge skills are going to be very, very high. Knowledge skills are the skills that your wizard is going to use the most. The primary usage in an optimized build, so D&D is a lot about the combat, and knowing what your opponent can do and what their weaknesses and strengths are is crucial to any combat situation. Now, if you're like me, I've played enough D&D where I can say, like, oh, we're fighting a wight. It's going to start draining our energy, so that's bad. And it's an undead, which means it's immune to mind-affecting spells. And you might know all this kind of thing off the cuff. But if you're encountering, say, an aboleth for the first time, you're like, I don't even know what an aboleth is, let alone what its weaknesses and strengths are, then these skills are going to help you out. Because some of these knowledge skills can be applied to monsters. And those are the ones you'll want to focus on as the monster knowledges. So which ones? There are 5 monster knowledges. There's Arcana, Dungeoneering, Nature, Planes, and Religion. And they each talk about certain types of monsters. And it does mention them in here. Like, for instance, Arcana tells you about constructs, dragons, and magical beasts like, I believe, griffins and unicorns and that kind of thing. While Dungeoneering is used for, like, oozes and aberrations, which I believe an aboleth is an aberration. So Dungeoneering me actually, like, it's not gonna. It's probably the one that comes up the least. But of course, it depends on the campaign setting. But Dungeoneering is usually the one that comes up the least, but it tends to be the most useful. Like a dragon, you might be able to guess what a dragon can do, or what a griffin can do. But are you going to be able to guess what an aboleth does? Not sure. I know I wouldn't be able to, and if I didn't know what an aboleth does, I would not be able to guess that. So Dungeoneering is very helpful. Nature, there are other classes that get knowledge nature. So if you're going to skip out on a knowledge skill, ask what your teammates, what abilities they have, and knowledge nature is one that they're likely going to have, like the ranger or the druid are going to have knowledge nature available to them. You're going to be better at it because of your high intelligence, but if you need the skill points for other things, let somebody else take knowledge nature. Knowledge planes is about demons, devils, angelic beings, so things that are basically from other planes of existence. Outsiders is the big keyword here. And then last is knowledge religion, which is going to tell you about undead. And undead are very, very common in Dungeons and Dragons. It's just like, all these other ones, like this one does aberrations and oozes, and constructs, dragons, and magical beasts, and religion only does undead. Well, that doesn't seem very useful. Well, it is. Undead, there's a huge variety of undead. Everything from vampires, wights, zombies, liches, draco-liches, skeletons, ghouls, and all of these things have sort of their own unique set of skills. Like, ghouls tend to be disease-ridden. Undead tend to be, immune to certain things, and they tend to have certain disabilities, while skeletons take damage or have damage reduction except to bludgeoning. All these things, and knowledge religion is going to tell you that. Knowledge religion is again like knowledge nature in that other classes get it as well. Like clerics and paladins get knowledge religion. And I think monks as well. So again, when it comes to knowledge religion and knowledge nature, ask your teammates if they have them, and you might be okay just skipping it because your other party members are going to have them. Definitely want knowledge arcana, definitely want knowledge planes, and probably want dungeoneering, nature, and religion. Those are like the 5 most important knowledges. That's not to say these other ones are useless. To be perfectly honest, it depends. The other ones are really, really role-play dependent. Like engineering is going to help you build things. Well, if you're going to be building a whole lot of things, this engineering might be useful. Knowledge geography, history, local, and nobility, it's all super role-play dependent. In my games, they tend not to come up very often. That's regardless of whether I'm DMing or playing a game with somebody else. They just don't tend to come up very often. That's not to say they won't come up very often in your game, but they're very situational. And they're not going to help you in combat. Doesn't matter. Knowledge geography isn't going to really help you in a combat unless you know where to unless you can set up an ambush in a certain terrain type or something like that. But you're going to have to think pretty hard. Well, the other 5 are going to help you out pretty much no matter what, because they're going to tell you stuff about your opponents. Okay. That's the knowledge skill. That's like one of the most important skills for a wizard. I'll close that too. Linguistics give you languages. Every time you put a rank in linguistics, you get another language. And as a wizard, you're going to be speaking lots of languages because of your high intelligence. So that's actually pretty nice. Profession is again like craft in that you have to pick a profession. Profession is not very useful. In Pathfinder Society, they use profession. You use your profession at the end of every session to make extra money. So there it's useful. Otherwise, and unless your DM is doing something like that, where you're actually actively doing your profession to make money or something like that, then skip this one. And then last, but certainly not least, is Spellcraft. Spellcraft is one that I do not consider optional for a wizard. Spellcraft is just far too useful. It helps you identify enemy spells. It helps you identify objects. And it's just one of those functions that the wizard is sort of meant to do. Other casting classes, there's quite a few casting classes that have charisma as their casting modifier, and so even though they get spellcraft, because spellcraft is keyed off intelligence, they're not going to be nearly as good at it, and it's something you want to be good at. It's left to the wizard. So, in summary, spellcraft and knowledges are what you're gonna want to get. Linguistics is pretty useful and fly when you can get it. And aside from that, most of the other ones are pretty skip worthy. Okay, but I really wanted to mention that for the wizard because, again, the knowledges are going to give you a huge advantage. Knowing what your opponent's weaknesses and strengths are is really good in and out of combat, really. Okay, but let's talk abilities here. So as a wizard, you're not going to get a whole lot of class abilities. You can notice that the special tab, which is normally filled to the brim for most other classes, is pretty empty. You're not going to get a whole lot of these, and that's because you get awesome spells. And before I go on, let me just make sure that everybody understands how wizards work. The way that a wizard works is that you have a certain number of spells per day. Your 0 level spells work a little bit differently from the rest of your spells, in that you basically say like, all right, I'm going to have these 3 or 4 0 level spells, and I can cast them an unlimited number of times in that day. So if it's like light or detect magic, you can just sort of throw those out whenever you feel like it. You just got to take the time to cast them. If there's 0 level spells, that's not going to be a problem. After that, first level and onwards, spell-wise, those spells are expended when you cast them. A wizard has a spell book and takes an hour every day to prepare spells, where they basically look over their spell book and memorize certain spells into it. And when they cast a spell, essentially the memory of the spell is erased or something like that. I'm not really sure what exactly the roleplay justifications for it are, but essentially you memorize the spell, and once it is cast, it is gone from your memory, and you have to remember it. You have to rememorize it. And that means is that if you want to cast a spell multiple times, you have to prepare it multiple times. So let's say that you're like a 3rd level wizard who's got, 3 or 4 first level spells, and you just want magic missile. You want nothing but magic missile, so you prepare it 4 times. You prepare 4 magic missiles, which means that later on, if you need to cast a different first level spell, you're just out of luck because you've used up all your memorization slots for magic missile. So every day, at the beginning of every adventure, at the beginning of every day in the game, you're going to have to sit down and put little check marks and multiple check marks depending on the spells that you've got memorized for the day. Here's a pro tip though. Pro tip is that it takes a wizard about 15 minutes to an hour, depending on the spell level, to memorize a spell that has been left blank. You don't have to use up all your spell slots first thing in the day. You can memorize, if you can memorize 4 spells, you can memorize 3 spells instead and leave one of those slots open to prepare in like sort of a 15-minute interval. And that can be very useful. That's a good, if you're ever, have a problem where you can just sit down and think about it. Well, if you can sit down and think about it for 15 minutes, you can prepare the spell. So that's something I actually recommend, especially if you have a lot of utility spells. So that's how spells work for a wizard. You prepare them, and you have to prepare them multiple times if you want to cast them multiple times. Okie dokie. So let's talk Arcane Bond. So a first level wizard gets the choice between a familiar being a little animal companion kind of thing that follows you around. They're very small and not very good at combat, so I do not recommend using them to fight, but familiars do give you other kind of bonuses, or an arcane bonded object. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both of those. So let's first I'm going to talk about familiars, because that is what it is in 3.5. In 3.5 D&D, you're going to get a familiar whether you want it or not. You don't have the option of an arcane bond. What familiars do is you basically pick from this list of familiars, and it can be everything from a hedgehog to whatever a kakapo is. I don't even know. And these familiars, like it explains here right now what familiars do. Even though it has an attack, I do not recommend attacking with your familiar. Really, all the familiar is going to do for you is, one, it could be a little bit of a scout. Some of them, because of their small size, and you can like cast invisibility on them or something like that, they can be used as scouts because they eventually can speak to you, and you eventually get the ability to scry on your familiar. So that is very, very late at 13. You can use them as spies. They can deliver touch spells. So if there's a situation where you need to touch an opponent with like shocking grasp or something like that, you can have your familiar eventually do that. And right off the bat, you get things like alertness, and it gets improved evasion. You get alertness, and the familiar gets improved evasion, and you can share spells with it, so it can cast spells. And it can be quite smart. So your familiar speaks. So there's a couple of nice little roleplay things that you can do with your familiar. It's got a couple of useful buffs it gives you. On top of that, you gain a bonus depending on what you pick. Like if you pick a sea crate, which apparently is like a viper, you get +2 to your fortitude defense, which is very nice. The ones that you want to look out for are the ones that give you initiative. Like the not +2 initiative. Why would I want +2 initiative when I can get +4 initiative? +4 initiative is very, very, very useful for a wizard. Highly recommend getting a familiar that gives you +4 initiative. The Scorpion is in fact normally what I go with. But there's a couple of other really good ones too. Note though that for linguistics, I told you every time you put a point into linguistics you get a language. If you get a modifier to linguistics, like this parrot gives you +3 to linguistics, that does not mean you get 3 languages. That is for all the other stuff linguistics does. So watch out for that. Other good ones are, bonus to fortitude saves. I'm not sure if there's any, there's some that give you bonuses to reflex saves, which is I think is even better. +2 bonus to reflex save, it's actually pretty dang good. So those are the ones you want to look out for. There's some that give you hit points apparently. You can get a chicken familiar if you want to talk to a chicken. Why not? But familiars are basically little goodie bags of abilities, and I recommend getting one that gives you a bonus to initiative. Yeah, but that's all that really needs to be said about familiars. Bonded object. So what a bonded object does instead is you pick something like a ring, or a wand, or a dagger, whatever. Something that you can carry with you. You don't want to choose like a wardrobe, or a ship, or I don't know what else you could pick, but you don't want to pick that. You want it to be something that you can carry with you at all times, because you need it to cast spells. And what the bonded object does for you is that once per day, you can cast any spell that you have memorized. I believe. Let me make sure it's I think it's that you have memorized. Cast a spell with this bonded object. Just want to cast any one spell that was. Nope, I stand corrected. See, I was about to say, like, I'm not sure if it's memorized. No. It's any spell in your spell book that you are capable of casting. You can get once per day. You can cast any spell in your spell book, which is phenomenal. That is a great, great ability. That's about as good of a utility ability as you can get for a wizard. Because there are going to be situations where you're like, man, I really wish I had prepared this spell. That would really help us out now. Once per day, you can. You will never be sort of caught off guard. You will always have the right spell on hand, because your spell book eventually is going to contain a huge number of spells. So just the pure utility of that ability is amazing. However, there is a catch. If your familiar dies, oh well, you'll make another one later. When your arcane bonded object dies, you'll make one later. But until you make another one, you need to make a DC 12 caster level check. DC 20 plus the spell level caster level check every time you cast a spell. So basically, every time you cast a spell, you have a chance of failure. That is freaking awful. Just having a chance of having your spells fail is pretty terrible. But at early levels, that's a pretty high chance. A level 1 wizard with 5 intelligence is going to have... Level 1 wizard with 5 intelligence is going to have a 6 caster level check. And if you're casting a first level spell, you need to make a 21. More often than not, you're going to fail that spell. So if you think that your DM or your campaign, you're likely to lose your bonded object, or if it's likely to get destroyed, go with a familiar. However, if you're in a campaign where that isn't likely, pretty much every game that I've played, it doesn't really mess with the wizard's bonded object or with the familiar even, or with, like, say, take away the wizard's spell book or something like that. That doesn't really happen in the vast majority of games that I play with. It's not to say, again, it won't happen in your game, but it doesn't tend to happen in the games that I play, so I usually go for the arcane bonded object because it is better. It gives you a better buff. But again, it comes at a greater risk. If you lose it, things suck a whole lot. So do be aware of that. But yeah, make a choice. If you're risk adverse, familiar. If you want the awesome ability, arcane bonded object. Okay, let's talk schools. So spells are split up into different schools of magic, which kind of do different things. And as a wizard, you get the option of specializing in a school. You can either specialize in a school or you can specialize in an element. Like fire or earth, air, water, void, metal, or what have you. The elemental schools, to be perfectly honest, aren't that great. If you're going to specialize in an elemental school, probably fire is the way to go, just for the sole reason that there's a ton of fire spells and not so much of the other spells. Like earth, there's a couple of decent spells at sort of 5th level spells and above, which you get way late. You get that at like level 10. So, earth and air, most of these other ones aren't that useful. Fire can get you, it is pretty decent. Wood, I don't even know what kind of spells wood improves. I have the strange feeling that a lot of these spells that wood is going to list, yeah, entangle, tree shape, sure, it gives you access actually to a couple of spells you wouldn't normally have access to. But yeah, notice that there isn't a 1st level spell for wood. Is there for fire? I mean, there's burning hands. Yeah, I think fire, there's just so many of them, they're not even going to bother listing them. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, see, look at this list, and look at this list. These are the wood magic spells. Oh, wait, no, these are the wood magic spells. So there's a couple. Oh, like light. Okay, fair enough. Animate, charm person. I don't know how that's a wood spell. But I think you're probably, like, fire, I think is a little bit more intuitive. Wood magic, maybe not as much. They're worth checking out if you really want to play them, but in general, I recommend going with specialist in conjuration. I'm not even gonna dance around the bush here. Conjuration is a fantastic school. The downside to becoming a specialist in a school is that you have to pick 2 opposition schools, and then those opposition schools, it's not impossible to cast those spells. It just requires 2 spell slots for every spell you prepare in it. So if you have 4 1st level spells, you could prepare, with those 4 slots, you could prepare only 2 opposition schools. So that's a little bit of a problem. So you're going to want to pick carefully what you specialize in. Whatever you specialize in, you get an extra spell slot per day, which is really good. Extra spells is always really good. And you get a bonus based on your level. And based on the specialization. Most of the special abilities you get for these, like banishment and creation, foresight, all these little abilities you get for picking a specialization tend to be not very good outside of like the first couple of levels. Some of them, the one for divination is a pretty good one. Foresight, that's actually a pretty decent one in the long run, but most of the other ones tend to be kind of good at level 1 and 2 and maybe 3, and then after that you kind of forget about them. So I would not pick a specialization school for the ability. I would pick a specialization school for the school, for what kind of spells you get with it. But that said, what kind of spells do you get with them? Conjuration is the one I recommend because there's a huge number of conjuration spells that help you out in all kinds of ways. It is a very, very versatile school. For instance, conjuration, you summon things like, so summon monster is under conjuration, but also things like Melf's acid arrow. Actually, I don't think it's called acid arrow in in Pathfinder. I don't think it's just called Acid Arrow, not Melf's Acid Arrow, like it is in 3.5. But Conjuration gives you just access to an amazing number of different types of spells. It gives you a variety, which is fantastic. And I highly recommend that you just sort of go into the spell list, and the sorcerer wizard spell list is broken into the different schools of magic. Like you can see, Conjuration here is Acid, Splash, and Drench, which is 0 level spells. Don't care. It doesn't really matter about 0 level spells. But see here we go. Mage Armor, which is a skill you're probably going to be casting, but also Infernal Healing, which is a healing spell. A healing spell is under Conjuration. A defensive spell under Conjuration. A summoning spell under Conjuration. And later on, there's even there's also acid damage dealing spells under here too. And acid is a pretty good element to have because very few things are resistant to acid. It's not like fire resistance where every other Yahoo is running around with fire resistance. No, there aren't that many things with acid resistance. So Conjuration is it's got a really good stuff, and it's a lot of utility stuff that you want to be going for, like Grease, which can be a devastating spell. So yeah, Conjuration is a really good one. Other schools that you can pick that are probably not terrible. So Evocation is the one that's going to deal the most damage. That's where you're going to find your Fireball, Burning Hands, and all those damaging spells. That's Evocation. Illusion spells are also some of the best spells for a wizard are under the Illusion school, so that's another good one. Enchantment tend to be a lot of buffs. That is stuff like Enlarge Person. You're basically enchanting them to be more awesome. And I'm assuming that like Eagle's Splendor, Cat's Grace, and all those fall under enchantment as well. Sometimes I'm not entirely sure myself. You can sort of see that, like, yeah, so enchantments includes things like Unnatural Lust. So if you want to have fun with that. Yeah, and the enchantment school is not one of the best ones. There are other classes that do much better with the enchantment school, like bards and even sorcerers, I guess. Not really sorcerers, but bards, for instance. They do better with the enchantment school. Abjuration actually has a couple of decent spells as well. That's also, again, sort of like they tend to be a lot of protective spells. Like you can kind of notice like Bullet Shield, Bullet Ward, Obscuring Mist, which makes it harder to hit you. Stuff along those lines. They tend to be pretty defensive. The sad thing is, there's Abjuring Step where you can basically move kind of freely. Protection from Evil is a good one. Shield. There are some good spells in here. But some of the best protection spells fall under Conjuration, like Mage Armor. So it's kind of sad that some of the best defensive spells don't even fall. Abjuration is very good defensively, and it's got some really excellent spells in it. If you don't pick it as your specialization school, I would at least not pick it as an opposition school, because some of these are really useful, like Shield or Protection from Evil. That said, though, if you have a good cleric in the party, the cleric is going to be casting a lot of these kinds of spells, like Protection from Evil, very much a cleric thing to do. Even Shield. I think they got Shield of Faith, which I'm not sure if it stacks with Shield, but they've got the cleric in the party can overtake this. So if you have got a good cleric in the party, you can actually safely get rid of Abjuration. Now, what does that leave for you? Necromancy is not terribly useful. I know Necromancy sounds awesome. I want an undead horde of minions too. But if you want an undead horde of minions, if that's what you want to base your character on, play a cleric. They're much, much better at it. If you look at the Necromancy school, so eventually you will get an ability called Animate Dead. No, not Animate Rope. I think it's Animate Dead. Let me make sure. Animate Dead. So if you look at Animate Dead, that is the spell that allows you to start summoning undead creatures. You will notice on here that a cleric and oracle gets this as a 3rd level spell, but a wizard and sorcerer gets it as a 4th level spell. It is their clerics are just much better at commanding hordes of undead. They just are. So while being a necromancer sounds cool, if you're going to do that, I recommend a cleric. And to be perfectly honest, it's, even as a cleric, it's not that effective unless you take a couple of like feats and special abilities that boost them. So do be aware of that. But it is an option. It is an option. But necromancy just really really is underwhelming. There are very, very few necromancy spells that I recommend. It's just not that great. Oh, transmutation. Transmutation, yes, down here. I kind of missed it almost because it's below the Sin Magic Specialist. Transmutation is a really, really good one. Transmutation is the one that has Bear's Endurance and Eagle Splendor and some of these ones that boost. Yeah, Transmutation also has things like Blink. It's actually got a couple of good defensive one, and that's where you're going to get Fly and some other really good ones. So Transmutation is pretty good. Enchantment is not that good. Some of the spells I was thinking of when I said enchantment's alright are actually under Transmutation. So enchantment's just, it's not that great. And Divination, unless you want to really, unless you have some good roleplay reasons for getting Divination, there are again other classes which do it better, like Oracle. And Oracle is going to do Divination School much, much better. So, summary here. If you're going to specialize, I would specialize in Conjuration. Aside from that, possibly Evocation or Illusion. There are some good spells in those too. Transmutation is definitely a possibility. If for opposition schools, I would pick Divination, Enchantment, and or Necromancy. Those three you're going to be pretty safe in getting rid of. And yeah, and that should pretty much have you be set. Now, there is another option. Instead of specializing in something, you can be a universalist, where you don't pick opposition schools, but you don't specialize in anything either. It's kind of a crud trade-off. It's kind of crappy. Because getting that extra spell slot that you're going to be using all the time is really, really, really useful. And that's an extra spell slot per level. So that's an extra first level spell, an extra second level spell, extra third level spell of that school, which is just, it's too useful. That is very, very good. So I would not recommend Universalist. If you really can't decide, if you're like, man, there's a couple of spells in Divination and in Necromancy that I want to cast, and in Enchantment as well. Like, there's literally spells everywhere that I'm going to cast, and I want to cast them for like role-playing reasons. Don't forget, you can still cast those spells. It just takes 2 slots. But if you really don't want to pick opposition schools, I don't blame you. I can kind of understand that myself. So, a Universalist is an option. But again, I recommend Specialist Conjuration. Okay. Whew, that was a lot. Since we were talking about spells anyway, now I'm going to talk about, what kind of spells you should pick for the first couple of levels that you should actually bother to memorize, because this is probably the most intimidating list in the game. The spells for wizards and sorcerers, because you have access to just so many spells. So what spells should you pick? 0 level spells, you're only going to get 3 at first level and then 4 beyond that. And that's not going to go up with a high intelligence modifier. It's just 4 period, and those 4 are the ones you prepare them, so you're going to be able to switch them out. But yeah, so Read Magic, you automatically, don't bother getting Read Magic because, oh wait, no, you do need Read Magic, I apologize. Read Magic is something you can prepare even without a spell book, because wizards they read magic so often. So even if your spell book is missing, you can always prepare Read Magic. Read Magic is not a bad one, being able to read read scrolls and spell books. Yeah, that's other people's spell books, not your own. But Read Magic, yeah, sure, why not? You could use those. You could use that eventually. Detect Magic is one that you're going to be called on to do again and again and again. Detect Magic I would pretty much always prepare, just because, yeah, it's basically like, all right, turn on my magic detector. It's got good out of combat utility. I would pretty much not bother with any of the evocation damaging spells like Ray of Frost. Dealing 1d3 cold damage is useless. And there's a bunch of here, like Acid Orb. I think, yeah, Jolt, 1d3 electric damage. It's useless. Don't bother with it. If you're going to do that, use a crossbow. You have access to a crossbow as a wizard. That is a thing that you can use. So just just do a crossbow. Don't bother with Jolt or Ray of Frost or Acid Splash or any of those. So Detect Magic's a good one. Daze can be good. It says a single humanoid creature with 4 hit dice or less loses its next action. Which, if you're using that to disable an enemy caster, it's actually not that bad. But Daze, maybe. Aside from that, Ghost Sound basically it's kind of like ventriloquism a little bit, where you can throw your sound, throw your voice and make sounds in another location, that's not that bad. Mage Hand, 5-pound telekinesis, where you can basically lift and move things up to a certain range away from pretty far away. That's a pretty good one. And then there's the most important spell, 0-level spell of them all, which is Prestidigitation. Prestidigitation, it just says here, performs minor tricks, which is like, well, what does that mean? It means stuff like make your food delicious. It means stuff like completely clean yourself. It means causing a little fireworks display in your hands. It can chill, warm, or flavor 1 pound of non-living material, so you can basically cook your meat. The reason why Prestidigitation is so good is because it's so versatile. Most of it's roleplay. To be perfectly honest, most of it's roleplay. But yeah, it can do all kinds of things. Everything from color, clean, or soil items in a 1-foot cube. And that's each round. So since Prestidigitation, you can cast as often as you want. You can just basically cast it on yourself. Like if you've just been wading through the mud, just cast it on yourself to clean yourself. It can be incredibly useful. They're good roleplay reasons, and these roleplay reasons are good enough that I'm mentioning them here. So I don't often tell you to get a spell before roleplay reasons, but this is one of them. So Prestidigitation, Mage Hand, Detect Magic is almost mandatory. Read Magic is a good one. Resistance may be subject against +1 the next saving throw, but it lasts for like a minute, so you can't just start stacking it like crazy. So resistance is meh. Ghost sounds pretty good, and the rest of them I'd pretty much forget about. Except for Message. Message is not a bad one. You can whisper conversation to distance, which basically if you need to communicate kind of silently further away, Message is a good. Okay, that's 0-level spells. Let's talk 1st-level spells. 1st-level spells, there is a huge number of 1st-level spells. 1st-level spells is the largest. The 1st-level spells are going to be your largest decision, and they're also going to be your bread and butter for a long time. So let's talk about which spells are good. Protection from evil. Most of the things you're going to be fighting are going to be evil, but that depends on your campaign. Evil things include like undead and dragons, which you know are going to be evil. Well, not all dragons are evil, but if you're facing if you're facing a color of a dragon like black, blue, red, green, like one of those kinds of primary colors, you know it's going to be an evil dragon, so protection from evil. It gives you it gives you that +2 save to AC, plus it says additional protection against alignment. What it's talking about is that summoned creatures, evil summoned creatures, can't touch you. That's useful. And if they've done yeah, okay, give me protection from evil. That's the entire reason why I clicked on that. Right. So you get the +2 bonus to AC and saves against evil creatures, and you get an additional saving throw if if an evil creature is trying to exercise mental control of you. So that horrible dominate spell that is wrecking your party because the party fighter is currently destroying you guys because it's been dominated. Cast protection of evil from them on the fighter, and not going to be a problem. It should not be much of a problem anymore. He gets another save, and hopefully we'll make it that time. So very good spell there. Shield is another good one. +4 AC, really nice. Doesn't last that long, but pretty nice. Going down. Grease is a fantastic spell, especially if you have a rogue in the party. The reason for that is of the... So here, that's right. Creatures that do not move on their turn do not need to make this check, or are not considered flat-footed. Okay, but they're considered flat-footed if they're moving through the grease spell, which is horrendous. They can be sneak attacked by rogues. And it's just kind of awful to be in a greased area. A great area control spell, good spell. Get grease. So grease is not bad. Mage armor is something that you're going to probably have. At level 1, it's only going to last an hour, but it's going to give you +4 armor bonus. So it compensates a little bit for the fact that you're not going to be running around in armor. You take a big penalty for wearing armor. Don't wear armor. So mage armor is the way to go. Cast it on yourself. Mage armor gets better as time goes on. So I would get the spell early, and then it'll just get better as time goes on. It's a good spell to have. Summon monster. Any of the summon monster ones are fantastic because the utility of using summon monster. Summoning a monster you can use in combat, and it's another... They're not that great in combat, to be perfectly honest, but they can absorb some damage, and they can deal out a little bit of damage. So summon monster is pretty good. Summon minor monster is not nearly as useful. Out of combat, summon monster can also be used to like trigger traps and things like that. So Unseen Servant has some of the same utility outside of combat, but it doesn't have the same... It can't fight. An Unseen Servant can't fight. Does last longer, though. So Summon Monster and Unseen Servant, pretty good spells. You're not going to find much in Divination for the first level. Like, I mean, Detect Undead if your campaign really calls for it. The only one that's any kind of decent is Comprehend Languages, which basically allows you to understand any language, written or spoken, but it does not allow you to speak it. That's important. So when you find a creature that's talking to you in a foreign language and it doesn't understand you, you can't make it understand you unless you cast... I'm pretty sure that Comprehend Languages is just... Is it on the self or just on the... Yeah, it's personal. It only works on yourself, so you can't cast it on the person you're trying to talk to. So Comprehend Language, it helps you out, but it's not going to solve all your problems. True Strike is a trap. I don't particularly like True Strike. If you really, really need to land a hit, True Strike is going to give you +20 on your next attack roll, but it's got to be within 1 round. So, it's alright. Charm Person. Makes one person your friend. It's kind of as this. They get a will save, and if they don't make it, they're their friend. Now, it's not going to turn a hostile creature to your best friend. No, it's going to turn a hostile creature into sort of unfriendly. It's still going to attack you. So Charm Person is more of a role play kind of thing. Like you cast it on the innkeeper to give you a discount, which is kind of nice. Sleep is great at level 1 and then gets progressively worse as time goes on because it only affects 4 hit dice worth of creature. At level 1, that can mean 4 creatures. At level 10, that means no creature. That means like 40% of a creature. It's not very good. So later on. So Sleep loses a lot of its ability. Let's see. Burning Hands is a decent damage spell. It's an AoE spell. It does a cone of fire damage, which at level 1 is 1d4, which is kind of meh. But after that, it starts getting better once it starts becoming like 3d4 or 4d4 at levels 3 and 4. It gets better as time goes on. That and you kind of want, as a wizard, to have an AoE spell available to you in case of swarms. So if you're getting attacked by a swarm of mosquitoes or a swarm of scarabs or whatever, those swarm traits mean that they take reduced damage from like weapons and things like that. So you want an AoE spell because you're going to be doing extra damage to them. I'm just going to double check to make sure everything's going okay with my recording. You can see that I'm using my recording software here. Yep, looks to be good to me. All right, let's keep moving on. Burning Hands, not bad. Other Magic Missile is a classic. It does very little damage. So it's going to deal 1d4 plus 1 damage, and you get an additional missile per 2 levels. So at level 3, you're dealing 2d4 plus 2 damage. Or, 1d4 plus 1 to 2 different creatures. So the damage is underwhelming to say the least. But there is a big benefit to Magic Missile, and then that is that it will never miss. It doesn't matter if you have a bajillion AC. touch or otherwise, it will always hit. It is affected by spell resistance, so it doesn't help you get past that. But there's no saving throw, and it's just going to deal 1d4 damage. It's almost unique in that if a creature doesn't have spell resistance, it's just going to do damage to it regardless. And sometimes that's quite valuable. Shocking Grasp does it seems like it deals a decent amount of damage. It's like, oh, a d6 per level of electric damage. That doesn't sound so bad. Careful, it's a touch spell. Not ranged touch, so you need to be right next to a creature in order to touch them with it, which is kind of crap. I don't recommend Shocking Grasp pretty much for that reason. Notice that I'm skipping over the vast majority of these spells, because most of these spells are kind of crap. I'm not going to lie. Like, Alter Musical Instrument. Make one instrument sound like a different kind of instrument. Okay? I mean, yes, that has roleplay aspects to it, but it's just not that great. Color Spray. Color Spray is at level 1 and 2. It is about the most devastating spell that you can find. Color Spray is phenomenal at those early levels because it just completely screws any creatures it hits. So if a creature has 2 hit dice or less, it is going to be blinded and stunned, and then continues to be blinded and stunned for a little bit longer. And it just, oh my god, it just completely takes them out of the fight. I mean, unconscious, blinded, and stunned for 2d4 rounds, and then blinded and stunned for another 1d4 rounds, and then stunned for another round, you take them out of the fight. You know, minimum, they've been taken out of the fight for 4 rounds. And maximum, they're taken out of the fight for, 13 rounds. Once they start getting higher level, like 3 or 4 hit dice, then the creature's blinded and stunned for 1d4 rounds and stunned for 1 round, which is still pretty dang good. That's still very good, because this is an AoE spell. You can cast this on multiple creatures. But once they have 5 or more hit dice, it's just going to stun them for a round, which is, it's okay. Stunning for a round is still not bad. But just compared to these lower levels, man, oh my god, at 2 hit dice, those creatures are completely out of the fight. It is devastating. So at level 1, level 2, get it. Gosh, it's so good. Let's see, a couple of other spells. Disguise Self changes your appearance. Good. Like, notice that Color Spray is an absolutely devastating spell in combat, and it's an illusion spell. Don't underestimate the illusion school. It is very good. Silent Image is another really good spell to have, because you can essentially put your opponents in boxes. You get to summon several boxes, illusionary boxes, if you want. I mean, you can make it shape into other things, but the way I usually like to use it is I like to put my opponents in these little boxes, and if they can't break the illusion, if they fail their will save, first of all, they have to take an action to interact with the stupid object, and if they interact with it and they don't make their will save, they believe they're actually in a box and are essentially out of the fight. So, yeah, it can be absolutely devastating. So, Silent Image, really good. Other things, Necromancy, I think pretty much has nothing here. Yeah, Ray of Enfeeblement gives a strength penalty, but it's like, the strength penalty isn't enough that it'll knock unconscious anything that you're fighting. So Ray of Enfeeblement's kind of underwhelming. Yeah, most of these are just not very good. Under Transmutation, let's see what we got. Yeah, nothing really. Enlarge Person. Alright, so there's a good transmutation spell here. There's an Enlarge Person. You can cast that on the fighter to make them large and give them all kinds of nice strength benefits. There should also be Reduce Person somewhere around here. Reduce Person is the one you want to cast maybe on the rogue to give them a bonus to stealth and dex. So, Reduce Person and Enlarge Person are not bad. Most of these other ones are not that great. Yeah. So that's first level spells, which is really the biggest spell list in the game. Then once you get a second level spells, there aren't nearly as many good ones. Second level is second level spells, they're okay. There's nothing really that outstanding. Like there's protection from evil communal, where it's basically like the protection from evil spell at first level, but you can cast on multiple creatures, so that's pretty good. There's that acid arrow I was talking about, which is okay. I don't actually usually end up getting it because the damage is, I mean, it's 2d4 plus 1, or 2 for 1 round plus an additional round per 3 levels. So it's like, it's okay. It can do a little bit of damage, and if a lot of spells are fire typed, and if you're encountering a creature, or if you're likely to encounter creatures that are resistant to fire, acid might be the way to go. But aside from that, let's see, glitter dust is actually a really good one. This is another one of those great utility spells. Glitter dust, you cast it on an area, and first of all, any invisible creatures in that area are revealed because they begin to like glitter, and you know that's bad for them, so it reveals them. But much more importantly, it has a chance of blinding all the creatures that you hit with it. So you cast it right in the middle of the goblin army, and you've just blinded like 4 or 5 of those creatures, depending on how tightly they're packed in there. And being blinded really, really sucks. It's going to make them flat-footed for your rogue. It's going to mean that they can't really attack. So glitter dust is actually a really good one. I do recommend glitter dust. There's of course summon monster too. There's a summon monster for every level, and they just give you access to bigger and better monsters. So summon monster 2. They all work about the same. They have the same kind of uses. They're just more combat useful the higher level they get. Divination, it's nothing really that great here. You might think like, oh, see invisibility, that seems useful. Well, the rest of your party can't see them, so that's actually not that great. So most of these are just kind of meh. Enchantment, a hideous laughter maybe. Hideous laughter, you get a save after every round, so even though Hideous Laughter says subject loses actions for 1 round per level, it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm 5th level. That means I get to take something out for 5 rounds. Odds are they'll make their save at some point. So it might take them out for like 2 or 3 rounds. It might also take them out for no rounds. So Hideous Laughter, it's kind of okay. It only affects 1 subject. Touch of Idiocy is actually better. Wait, I think that's to a minimum of 1. Is that to a minimum of 1? I think it is. So the penalty can't reduce an AV score below 1. Okay, never mind. Touch of Idiocy is not that great. It is kind of good if you're facing a lot of enemy spellcasters, because if you reduce like a wizard's, reduce a wizard's intelligence by 3 or 4, he might lose access to some spells. Same with clerics and sorcerers, because it hits all the mental stats, so it's going to affect all spellcasters. So Touch of Idiocy, maybe. Not that great. Not that great. Under Evocation, you're going to find, what's it called? Scorching Ray. Yeah, Scorching Ray. Scorching Ray is actually a pretty decent damage spell, because it's 4d6 fire damage, plus you get an additional ray for every 4 levels. So yeah. Scorching Ray, not bad. You can deal a decent amount of damage with that. And again, beyond that, not really a whole lot. Not really a whole lot here that's really worth your time. Flaming Sphere is not bad. You basically create a rolling ball of fire that deals 3d6 damage, but sticks around for a little bit. So that's kind of nice. Yep, nope, that's it. Illusion. Illusion has at least one really good one, which is Invisibility. Invisibility does go away when you attack or do something offensive, but, you know, if you're following this guide and you're playing a utility-based wizard, you can make yourself invisible and then cast things like Summon Monster. That's not an attack. So, invisibility, and of course, you know, getting the thief to go sneak into the enemy camp and scout it out for you with invisibility makes that a heck of a lot easier. Mirror Image creates a decoy of yourself, so that can be pretty good. Minor Image is like Silent Image, but it gets to add sound to make it, I guess, more convincing. To be perfectly honest, I think Silent Image is good enough. Necromancy, again, it doesn't have like anything really good at all at level 2. Except maybe blindness, deafness. You can make a subject blind or deaf, and by the way, that's permanent. This isn't like one of those, oh, it goes away eventually. You make them blind forever. So that can be very powerful. Now, most of the time you're facing a creature and you're going to keep beating its head in until it dies. So, you know, the fact that it's forever isn't really that bad. It really sucks when one of the PCs get hit with it. You can get rid of it, of course. There are ways, but yeah. Command Undead is also it, which commands a couple of undead to do your commands. But to be perfectly honest, the number of hit dice it affects, I think it's based on hit dice. Under creative the subject intelligence. Yeah, intelligent ones. It's okay. That's all right. It does last a couple of days, so you could snatch a couple of undead with the necromancer spell. That's all right. Maybe I'm being too hard on it. Then in transmutation school, you're also going to find lots of really good ones. You're going to find Bear's Endurance, which is going to give you +4 con. You're going to find Eagle Splendor, Cat's Grace, and all these other ones that are going to give you +4 to any of the attributes that you want. And that's very, very good. You can use that. I mean, it only lasts a minute per level, but that's not bad at all. So there's a couple of good ones here. Whew. I know. There's a lot of spells here to go through, but I'm trying to narrow it down for you guys here. Third level, and this is the last level that I'll go over a couple of maybe fourth level spells. But notice that the lists get smaller and smaller as you go along. Like second level still has a bunch, but third level has fewer than second level, and then fourth level has fewer than third level. So they get smaller and smaller. Third level is when wizards truly shine. First level and second level spells are pretty decent. They're going to get you to do a bunch of things, and you're going to do them pretty well. But third level is when you get access to some of the most devastating spells in the entire wizard arsenal. Which includes, well, first of all, protection from energy. That's a pretty good one. Being able to say, like, hey, everybody want to absorb some fire damage? Sounds good to me. As well as resist energy communal. Those are pretty good ones. Then in Conjuration, of course, being an awesome school, you're going to find a couple of good ones, including one of the best spells in the game, period, Stinking Cloud. Stinking Cloud is an absolutely terrifying, awesome spell. Stinking Cloud. Now, what does it do? You basically create an area, a 20-foot radius area, so that's a really large area, that is just awful for any living creature. What you do is you cast that area of spell where you think enemies, where you don't want enemies to be, or where enemies are going to be, and they have to make a save. If they don't make a save, they are nauseated for the entire time that they're within the cloud, and then an additional 1d4 plus 1 rounds after they leave this horrible stinking area. And nauseated is one of the worst conditions you can get. You lose your standard action. You only get a move action. You get a single move action while you're nauseated. It is awful. It disables casters, it disables fighters, it disables anybody that it hits with it, and it can disable multiple people. Stinking Cloud. Fantastic spell. Get it. And it's under the Conjuration School. I was telling you Conjuration School was just amazing, and this is one of the reasons why. Stinking Cloud. And of course you got access to Summon Monster 3, and yeah, there's a couple of, most of these other ones are kind of subpar. But Stinking Cloud's so good it makes up for the whole thing. Divination, you've got Clairaudience, Clairvoyance. Hear or see at a distance, where you can basically see really far away, which, you know, it's got some roleplay aspects to it. Then there's Tongues, which is like Comprehend Languages, but you can actually speak and understand any language, so it's better. So that's not bad. And let's see, what else we have. Under enchantment, there's Heroism, but to be perfectly honest, leave that for the bards to cast. There's Suggestion, which Suggestion is like the first real mind control spell you're going to find, where you compel a subject to follow a really simple command, like drop. It's got to be limited to a sentence or two, so he's like, drop that weapon. And, yeah. And you're going to be able to give them very simple commands, and they'll have to follow it out. Now, it can't be something like kill yourself. That's not allowed. Don't even try that. I think it specifically says here. Decision activity can be compelled in a shorter time. Yeah, it says somewhere in here, like, oh yeah, you influence the active target creature's possession and course of activity. The suggestion must be worded in such a manner as to make the activity sound reasonable. Yeah, asking a creature to do something obviously harmful automatically negates the spell. So suggestion is not that powerful yet, but it's pretty powerful. So suggestion, it's not bad. Um, Evocation. Evocation's got some good ones, primarily Fireball. Here's the famous Fireball spell. It a 20-foot radius of an explosion that's just going to deal 1d6 per level. So that's pretty good. Lightning Bolt works pretty much the same way as Fireball, except it encompasses a different area. Lightning Bolt is not as good as Fireball. Lightning Bolt goes in a straight line. Fireball goes in an area, so you're better off with Fireball. Unless, of course, you're facing a bunch of fire-resistant enemies. Illusion. You're not going to really find a whole lot here, are you? No, there's nothing really that great in Illusion. There's Invisibility Sphere, which is like Invisibility, but it works on a bunch of creatures in a 10-foot radius. So that's not bad. Necromancy is, again, kind of underwhelming. There's Vampiric Touch, where you can gain a couple of temporary hit points, which is, it's okay. Yeah, there's nothing really that great under Necromancy. Notice how underwhelming Necromancy is. You can usually get rid of it. Transmutation here has a couple of good ones. Beast Shape is really good when you get to turn into an animal, and get all of its abilities, which that's really good. The Druid can do it better, but hey, you can do it now too. There's Fly. Being able to fly is really, really good, and you can cast it on your party members too. So that's really good. And then there's Haste, one of the best spells in the game, period. You cast it on all your fighting type guys, and they're going to get an additional attack per turn, as well as +1 AC, attack, and reflex. It's just really, really good. So Haste and Stinking Cloud. Haste, Stinking Cloud, and Fireball are my go-to third-level spells, and are pretty much the reason why third-level spells are awesome. And that pretty much covers it for third-level spells. You notice that we're going through these much quicker as we go along. Fourth-level spell, the one spell that I want to mention for fourth level, like, third level is by far, or third-level spells are by far, that is the milestone marker for a wizard. Though third-level spells are so good that at that point you begin, you can start dominating them. Fourth level spells, there's a couple of good ones. The one that I want to mention is Black Tentacles. I know how it sounds. Like, I've seen enough hentai to know where this is going. But Tentacles, it's a devastating spell. It grapples a bunch of things. So don't underestimate Black Tentacles. And aside from that, there's a couple of other decent ones here. But I'm not going to talk about them right now. In fact, I think I'm going to make this a two-parter, because I know this video has gone on way too long as is already. But in my next video on Wizards, I'm going to be talking about magic items selection, because you're going to want a couple. I'm going to talk about feats. I haven't even talked yet about what race you should pick, so I'm going to talk about that too. So I'm going to finish up in the next video on building a wizard character. But at this point, I feel like you should already know enough in terms of, like, really, really the core aspects of a wizard to be able to build a decent one. And spell selection is really the biggest aspect of it. Okay, so I hope this video has been helpful so far, and I hope to see you guys next time.